Hey there, this is Mike Warren with Business Mastery University, and thank you for joining me on this section where I want to talk about dealing with business brokers. Now, business brokers can either be helpful or they can be a pain in the butt. I will tell you, most of the time, they're a pain in the butt. And you might want to say, okay, well, how do I deal with this pain in the butt? And there's a couple of ways that we deal with it, and I'm going to come at this from two different angles. One angle is don't deal with the brokers at all because there's easier ways of getting deals, and the other way is, okay, if you've got to deal with a broker, how do you do it properly so that you can still get the information that you need and still possibly get a deal? So with that being said, let me talk about some of the negative things about dealing with a broker first, and we'll talk about how to get through it, okay? So the first thing to know is that when you deal with a broker, so my original background had a lot to do with real estate. And in real estate, it was either the real estate agent or the attorney when I was trying to do creative financing, a structured deal that required no money out of my pocket. It was the attorney or the real estate agent that would almost always screw up the deal. So when I was dealing with agents or attorneys, only about half of my deals would typically go through. The other half were messed up by those professionals. Now, they were trying to look out for the best interest of the client or their supposed client in that case and didn't allow the deal to go through. Now, it doesn't mean that it was bad. It just means that that's what it is. Well, we run into the same scenario today in today's market when we're dealing with business brokers. A business broker, well, I'm thinking about a bunch of things in my head here, but the business broker, when they're working with a seller, they may have overinflated the valuation of the business in the seller's mind to try to get the listing for the seller. And they may have had a overall higher expectation of how fast the business would sell, how much cash the seller would get, and all the benefits of why that seller needed to work with that broker. So the broker a lot of times gets very nervous when somebody like us wants to step in and negotiate with the seller directly, which we always want to do. We may be talking with the broker initially, but I always want to have my conversations with the seller because I don't want to depend on the broker to tell me information that the seller may say, because they have to interpret what the seller says, tell it to me, and they have to take what I say, interpret it in their mind, and then say it to the seller and try to pass that information back and forth. It's kind of like the game that if you line up, let's say 8 or 9 people, and you say one thing to the first person, you have them repeat it to the next person, and on down the line, the person at the end did not hear anything close to what started at the very first person. It's because you get people translating, interpreting what they think they hear and hearing what they want to hear. And we run into the same scenario when we deal with brokers. So when I'm talking with a broker, I have to always try to get to the seller. The question is, how do I do that? Well, when I'm talking with that broker, I want to emphasize that, hey, I'm a buyer, and do we have cash available to buy the business? Yes, but I'm probably not going to buy it with all cash. If the owner's not willing to offer seller financing, then this is not a deal you should take at all. Don't deal with a broker if the seller says the owner's not willing to take financing at all. Now, you may find a seller says, yeah, I'll take 20% or 30%, owner financing. At least that's a starting point. And we have to talk to them to figure out more about, well, what might they do in order to get more owner financing for us to structure this deal. Keep in mind that the broker is getting paid a commission. Now, their commission could be as low as, let's say, 2% to as high as 15% of the gross sale price of that business. So let's take, for instance, a $1 million business and a 15% broker's commission. That's $150,000 that's going to the broker. That's a lot of money. If we're trying to structure this deal as a no money out of our pocket kind of deal here, well, where do we come up with that $150,000 to pay the broker? It's very difficult. We have to take it out of sales. We have to take it out of operations or something like that in order to pay the broker. And guess what? The broker doesn't want to wait. He could, just like in a real estate deal, we could structure it so that he gets his money in payments from the operations of the business. We could do that. But a lot of times they just want to get paid now. So some cash is required, which means we have to get the owner to do some type of financing where, excuse me, let's say that they sell a house or sell a business and they carry back a note. Let me give you an example. So we just structured a deal with a construction company where they're taking back 2 notes, and we are getting 98.5% owner financing. Now think about that, 98.5% owner financing. And they're taking 2 notes. Well, they're taking one larger first note that they're going to sell off about 3 months from now in order to generate the cash, which Fortunately, there's no broker involved. That's partly why this deal went really easy. But they have other debts that they need to pay off, other creditors and investors that are part of the business. They want to take that lump sum of cash, pay off all those people, take a lump sum of cash that they have that they can invest in buying a house. And then they have the second note that gives them monthly cash flow. So that allows that deal to go through. Even if a broker was involved, it would allow us to generate the cash to pay the broker and pay off whatever debts that the seller may have, and still give the owner some cash, depending upon what those numbers were and how we structure the deal. So we need to do a little bit of creative financing here in order to get all the parties to play to get this deal to go to closing. An all-cash transaction is not what we will do. It is not what you're going to do. If you want to do that and you have the cash, that's great. But you know, the reality is in this marketplace, and the marketplace has kind of been the same for the last 30 years that I've been in it, you don't need to do that. There are lots of deals where the sellers will take financing, meaning they'll carry paper, they'll act like the bank. There's no qualifications, there's no credit reports, there's none of that stuff that's required in order to get the owner to give you financing. So when we structured this deal with this construction company, they didn't ask for our credit report, they didn't ask for our bank statement, and they gave us 98.5% owner finance. That means we only had to come up with 1.5% owner finance, a very, very tiny amount, in order to structure that deal. So again, let's go back to kind of the broker. What are the motivations of the broker? Broker wants to get paid. Well, if we're doing a no money down deal or a 1 or 2% money down in order to finance this deal, how do we make this deal work? Well, we have to structure it creatively, meaning we have to get the owner to carry paper for the amount. So let's say it's a $1 million business. So let's use some actual numbers. $1 million business, we might want the owner to do, let's say, a $700,000 first mortgage and a $300,000 second mortgage or note on the business. Now, if you think about it, $700,000, they could sell off that note at the closing table, and they'd probably get somewhere about $550,000 to $600,000 by selling it. Now, why would they get that amount? So every note that gets sold takes a discount. So let's say they structure the note to get so that we would pay them, let's say, 4% interest or 5% interest. But an investor comes and says, well, I want to get 9% interest on my money if I'm going to buy this note. Well, in order for the investor to get 9% interest, since the monthly payment is going to be fixed, once we structure a deal with a seller, our payment is fixed. That's how much we pay for however long we agree to do those number of payments. So the only way that the investor can get a higher rate of return is by agreeing to pay a smaller amount to the seller of the note so that they get less, which means less cash. It means that it's what's called a time value of money. When you do it on a financial calculator, you know, kind of one of these things here, you do it on a financial calculator, it'll allow the investor to get a 9% return, even though we're only paying 5% and we have a fixed payment that we make each month. So they pay less to the seller. Well, the seller is willing to take that discount because they get a lump sum of cash. So it would be like us going in on $1 million business and negotiating the seller down on the business. Well, instead of negotiating them down, we want owner finance. We want all owner financing. We're willing to pay more for that so we can get the deal. So if the seller can sell it for $550, and let's say the seller was somehow agreed to pay 15% to the broker for a commission, well, out of that 50, $150 goes to the broker for their commission, which would leave a $400,000 balance in cash that would go to the seller. So the seller gets $400,000, and they still have a $300,000 note on the back end. Total value of about $700,000. Well, really $850,000 what it is, because they still got to pay that broker commission, right? But they see a net amount of cash in their hands of about $700,000. Well, it's just like us negotiating the business down 20, 30%. And we would do that on every deal anyway. So the broker in that scenario would be more willing if they understand what this creative financing means. The challenge is, though, that most brokers don't understand seller financing. They don't understand creative financing at all. They only see this. They see, hey, I want to sell a business. You need to write me a check for $1 million, and you go away now, and I'll get my commission. That's what they see, and that's what they want. The reality, though, is something totally different. The reality is that almost every transaction, every small business transaction in today's market involves some form of owner financing. So you have to get a little bit creative with it. The challenge that we have is explaining it to the broker. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to ever explain it to the broker because it will never work. You'll get brokers that will say, well, I've been doing this business for 30 years and I've never had to do any seller financing. You know, some of my little southern drawl that I've got going on there. So they're looking at it and saying, well, I've never had to do any seller finance. Don't see why we should have to do that now. You're talking to the wrong person. What you need to do is have a conversation with the seller to find out, well, what the seller's needs are. And would the seller consider owner financing in order to structure this deal? They're still getting the cash that they want. So rather than us negotiating the price down, we give them paper, they sell off the paper, they get the cash. Ultimately, the seller doesn't care because they get cashed out, right? So somebody else is buying that note, somebody else is taking that risk. The seller gets a lump sum of cash, which is what he wants in the very beginning anyway. The question is just how much will it be? So what we need to do is we need to get past the broker to talk to the seller to explain this idea of seller financing and figure out first off, well, how much owner financing or seller financing, all the same thing, how much are they willing to do? My watch is trying to go off and tell me stuff. What kind of financing are they willing to do in order to make this deal go through? So we have to have at least this introduction, right? So I want to kind of show a couple things for you. And I know I was over, where are my slides? I know I've got some stuff showing up on the screen there. So let's pull this up, right? So when I'm talking with brokers, right, and you can find lots of deals in lots of different areas. If you look in the manual, you look on the website, we talk about finding deals. The challenge that you're going to have is, again, that you're dealing with brokers. If I have a choice, I will not deal with a broker. For instance, that construction deal that we did, no broker. Most of our deals, I would say 75 or 80% or higher of our deals do not involve any brokers whatsoever. If you're just starting out in this business, you're looking for deals where you're going to go on to, you know, Business for Sale, businessbroker.net. You're going to go on to any of these websites, and you're going to start looking for businesses that are for sale, but most of them involve brokers. Well, you're like, okay, well, gosh, that's all the businesses I'm finding. I can't find anything else. I'll show you in a minute that there's lots of ways to finding other deals that you can look at. And guess what? Every month there are new deals. All right. So even if you happen to go through whatever there is on a particular website, doesn't mean that's the only deals that are out there. So if you're working with a broker, let me go down to a couple other slides here that I want to point out. So this is a sample message that you're looking at, right? So I'm looking on my screen over here. You guys can kind of see me, but you'll see the screen as well. And when you're writing to them, you know, email them about their listing, the number in the description, you know, dear, whatever their name is. I'm interested in learning more about this business. Imagine you've received several inquiries. You know, please forward a non-disclosure agreement. So you'll need an NDA signed by you for the broker and the seller so they are willing to share financial data with you. If the broker does not have an NDA or does not require it, I kind of like that because we have two types of brokers that we're dealing with. One broker is a sophisticated broker. The other broker is a non-sophisticated broker. The sophisticated broker has put together a really fabulous package. Oh, this business is great. Here's all the financials. Here's how you market it. Here's how you sell it. Here's how you can step in and run the business. Well, that type of broker, you're going to pay top dollar for that business. What I want are the brokers who will never call me back. It takes 15, 20 phone calls for them to actually call me back. Now, think about that. The average person is going to call one time. A really aggressive person might call 3 times. But if I have to call a broker 20 times, what do I know is not happening there? I know the business is not selling. That's what I know. So if I know the business is not selling, and because they're not answering their phone call, then that means I'm probably the only game in town, which means I can negotiate this deal a little bit better because the seller's probably sitting back trying to figure out how come nobody's, looking at my business. Nobody wants my business. Well, the broker could be unsophisticated, meaning that they're really lazy. They just want to get the listing, put it out there. But they don't have the time to return people's phone calls. Well, if you were selling a house, would you want that as an agent for you that was selling your house, where they're not taking phone calls of prospective buyers? And you don't know who's a good buyer, who's a bad buyer. So sometimes these brokers, one of the other things they're also going to do is they'll give you this big long list of all these financial documents and disclosure things that they want you to fill out. Give me a buyer profile, list your finances, list your experience, list all these different things here. And you know what? I can understand why they do that, but I have a very simple workaround for it. Now I'm going to tell you what our workaround is. And because we're a private equity group, and for our higher end students who are some of our partners in our private equity group, what we do is we have a very simple response to when somebody has to fill out this big long disclosure form of all this information. And really all this is to get rid of the tire kickers. That's all it is. What I'll do is when they give us this form and they ask us for this stuff, we'll say NA, non-applicable. So NA, and they'll say, well, why is it? Why didn't you answer any of the questions? Well, because we're a private equity group and we're not going to answer all those questions. We're cash buyers if the deal is right. So if we're going to pay all cash, we want a big discount. If not, we're going to get some kind of owner financing. If there's no owner financing in this deal, then I guess I should be moving on. Or you can go sell it to somebody else. So when we talk about it from the standpoint of a business versus an individual, so if you're an individual, you can do the same thing and structure it that way. So I know we're kind of running up against a 15-minute window here. I try to do this in 15-minute blocks. So what I'm going to do is kind of leave you hanging on this letter, this solicitation letter, and that description of dealing with the broker. So the application that they have, it's not a big deal, right? So if they want, I'm not going to answer it because we're buying it as a business, not as an individual. Businesses don't answer all these things. Private equity groups don't answer all those things. Individuals do, and we're not buying it as an individual, and neither should you. You should never take any of these deals in your own name. So with that, we're going to do a second video that will expand on this a little bit more and show you how to find these owner financed deals that are available right now in the marketplace, and we'll show you that as well. So go ahead and look for the second video in this on dealing with brokers, and I'll see you in just a minute. Bye for now.